In this video, we're going to talk about the top cloud adoption mistakes and what kind of issues can come out of that. One of the main things is increased cost, so your cloud spend can kind of spiral out of control, as well as reduced security. So you put yourself organizations put themselves more at risk from a data breach or a hack or whatever. It's kind of based on, if we look here, a talk that we did at the South Coast Summit last year. So instead, what we were going to do is just post this video, but the sound and you can't really see the slides properly. So we thought, let's just re-record it properly so you can see the slides and hear everything nice and clearly, because it was quite a busy hall and the camera's quite far back. So yeah, at the end, what I'll do is I'll take you through the actual documentation from Microsoft on the anti-patterns on things what not to do and why. So I'll show you that at the end as well. So what we'll do is we'll get cracking with the slides that we showed here, slightly updated on some of the things that go wrong in a cloud adoption project when you don't follow the best practices. So what we'll do, we'll go through these slides, and what we'll also do is I'll show you where the guidance is in the actual Microsoft documentation in the framework, in the cloud adoption framework, and it'll talks about some of the things that we mentioned here, and there's like official documentation and guidance as well. But a lot of this is from our own experience and some of the things that we see happening. So if we make a start with here, so a common one, lack of strategy and planning. So kind of what are the things that we see and what happens? So people adopt the cloud, it's usually for a specific project, or we want to run a specific test or migrate to the cloud as part of some form of high level commitment, but not really look at why they're doing that. Who owns it, whose responsibility is it, who's going to implement it, who's going to support it. And then what kind of happens is that people have accidental responsibility. So the person who's closest fit kind of gets lumbered with everything. They may not get properly trained or have time to be trained themselves, even because the timelines or whatever. Again, and also there may be no ownership as well. So people just tend to have a go, throw something up there and hope for the best. And what happens in those cases, you won't necessarily have standards. You don't have the time to build the standards and consistency that's required. So you may have different cloud environments, and they're all different to each other. They'll have different naming, incorrect networks and things that we'll show later. Teams don't know who's responsible, so they end up maybe even fighting. Hopefully not physical, but they can have fallouts against different teams in the same organization. And some people will just learn enough knowledge. Some people will gain enough knowledge just to be dangerous. They won't understand what they're fully doing and what the consequences of some of those things are. And those things can lead to some issues that we'll talk about in a moment. Okay, so that's lack of strategy and planning, inevitable outcomes, and some of the symptoms. So what can we do about that? So to prevent these kind of things, is understand the motivations and required outcome. What is it that we're actually trying to achieve? How are we going to measure it once we've adopted the cloud? And also developing the RACI matrix and cloud center of excellence potentially, or where can a partner fit into this if you need one? And those are things like who's responsible for those cloud adoption components internally, as well as where does the partner fit in? Where does the cloud vendor, such as Microsoft, where do they fit in? Which parts is everybody responsible for? Internally, you may have a team that's responsible for the security and governance requirements, defining what those are. You may use a partner to execute those and deploy the resources and manage them. And then you may use Microsoft for the Azure platform. That's the platform that we're going to use. But understand where all those pieces fit and who's responsible for what. Okay, skills gap analysis. Who's doing that training? If it's internal, do we have the right team? Have we got the right training plans in place? We could potentially do another video on the training plans, because there's a good paths to follow for trainings, for training internal teams that we use for our customers. We help those teams get up to speed and point them in the right direction of the courses and certifications that they should be able to follow through to get a decent understanding of the platform. Okay. Poor foundations. This is a big one as well. So what happens? No governance and guardrails, poor network security, zero access control, no monitoring and automation, and users can run wild. So what that essentially means is that without governance and guardrails, which if we talk about Azure, there isn't really any governance and guardrails unless you put them in. Your users, once they've got access to do anything, say, let's say they've got what they call contributor access, you give them access because that's the most common thing that we see. They've got a subscription, they need to do something, and they get granted contributor access. They can go and create whatever they like inside that subscription. So we did a video recently on management groups and Azure policy governance. So take a look at that to see some examples of that. But just be mindful at this phase, without any governance and controls in place and guardrails, the users will be able to just do whatever they want. So let's say you're a UK based health organization storing patient data. There's nothing in the platform for you. There's nothing in the platform that prevent you creating, say, a storage account and storing all that data in there. And that storage account could be in the US or it could be in Japan or wherever. And also, it's secured to a point, but you've got to fully understand the authentication methods and network security around that data as well. And that's where get these things wrong, and that's where these data breaches happen. Okay, and it's usually caused by misconfiguration, lack of training, and that can cause quite a lot of damage as well. And not only can it be cost and security, you can have downtime, outages, user complaints, and one of the things that we mentioned, understanding who's responsible for which part. One of the things that we see is um, customers put their data into the cloud and assume that the cloud vendor is backing up all that data. It's not necessarily the case. You need to deploy and implement backup solutions and configure them. So just because it's in the cloud doesn't mean it's getting backed up. So that's another common issue that we come across. So how do we prevent those kind of things? So we'll look at in Azure. What we do typically is design and deploy a solid landing zone. That means we deploy the network components, access control, guardrails, policy governance, which makes it a lot more secure and a good baseline to then start putting your workloads in. That you've got a good baseline security and governance in place. Okay, so that's your security guardrails. Also, cost tracking elements and controls. So you can have controls in the platform that says you're only allowed to deploy these types of resources or these sizes of resources. And that can help with your cost controls and tracking in terms of things like tagging who owns this resource, who created it, when did they create it. And you can use you can use tagging to track that kind of information as well, and also include proper logging and auditing who's doing what in your platform. Again, by default, there is an element of logging, but it's gone after 30 days or 90 days. Are you logging that long term as well? So if there is a data breach, and let's say your security insurance company says, we want to have all the logs of what happened up to this point for the last year. Who's had access to this environment? What have they been doing in it? And that's where your logging and auditing needs to come into play. And again, it's not always there out of the box. All right, going with the defaults is another dangerous thing and a very, very, very common thing. So what do we mean by that? So this is where you can get your inconsistent or just incorrect configurations. It's not what you actually want to be using at all. You'd have unwanted resources, unwanted networks all over the place, bad IP addressing, so nothing can connect to each other. You can't scale your networks correctly. You can't connect them to your on-premises. You can't bring in a new environment because all your networking is incorrect. And that can cause a huge amount of rework. And then you've got things like open ports to the internet. Some of the default settings are, yes, allow access from the internet. So whether that's a database, a storage account, a virtual machine, the default setting is, yes, let's allow access from the internet. And you may not always want that. Generally, you don't for your internal systems. Okay. Again, using these defaults, it could cost you a lot more. Some of the default settings are, higher than you might need. The security risks are also there because your default firewall settings and your security systems are not always optimized, let's say. And again, that could lead to data breach as well, and as we mentioned there. Okay, some examples of this. So this is a really, really common example. So when we look at an environment, we'll check out their networks, and if we see things like this, so your default network IP ranges, it'll give you, like it shows here, 10.0.0.0/16, which means it's going to assign 65,000 IP addresses for your network, and you may only have a few things in there. And then the next person comes along and does the same thing. Now you've got two networks with 65,000 IP addresses. You can never link them together because they've got the same IP ranges. So they're going to overlap, and that's when, you know, it may be okay. They might need to be isolated, but then once you start developing that environment, you want to kind of have a proper or IPAM, IP address management process or system in place where you can actually understand your IP addressing properly. Okay, creating a storage account. So as I mentioned, some of the default settings are to allow access from all networks, which means the internet. So if you create a database or storage account, access is open from the internet. Obviously, that's not authentication; that's network level access. So that service will be visible over the internet. So you may not necessarily want that. If there's no reason to have a storage account accessible from the internet, then it shouldn't be. Okay, the same with virtual machines. So if you go with some of the defaults, it will open up RDP. Do you want a public IP address? Yes. And it's going to open up 3389 TCP port. And it'll also give you a warning, but it is kind of one of the default settings as well. It'll create a new IP address. It'll even create a new virtual network, as we can kind of see here. I can see that here. So go and create a brand new network. And create me this IP address, and you can kind of see this warning here. So these are the kind of things you want to look out for, really. So this is where people just having a go or having limited training and then going and setting up environments, that's where it can get dangerous. And these are the kind of things that we look for. Okay, so how do we prevent that? Again, deploy a solid landing zone. That's got governance and guardrails in place that says things like don't allow RDP ports open from the internet. So if somebody goes through that wizard, it will get blocked and say, all right, you're not allowed to do this. And that's kind of just one example. Only allow certain locations. Proper access control. Don't give more access than is required. Make sure access is at the correct scope. And also proper training. So there's not really much substitute for proper training and experience as well. Okay, so a quick summary there. We just talked about how important governance and guardrails are in your cloud adoption journey, how important access control is, and the importance of planning and foundations, as well as proper training. So with that, what I'll do is I'll flip over to the Microsoft guidance on this stuff here. And we can see the cloud adoption framework. As you can see the URL there. If we just go to that URL, which is, let me just navigate to that. One area I wanted to show you as well, right at the top of the framework. So if you look outside of the phases of the CAF, which are strategy, plan, ready, adopt, govern, and manage, right at the top, you've got the adoption journey. So and here's a really good place to just look at the different types of journeys that you can have. One of the areas in here is if we look at anti-patterns to avoid. So here, right at the top, there's a good breakdown of all the anti-patterns across all the different phases as well. So there's some really good guidance in here. So it's worth checking some of this out as well. We won't go into any detail here, but just to point out that that's there right at the top level. So you, instead of browsing through there, you can also get them through here as well. So if we go to that URL, aka.ms/CAF, that gives you the full Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework for Azure site. Let's just hit it and refresh that page. And then what you can do is you can go into any of these areas. So we can do another session on what all these areas mean. But if we talk about governance and things like that, we probably go into here. And then inside there, all the documentation about governance, how it works, and cost management, security, consistency, all those kind of things. First the theory, and then they have practical examples as well. But what I wanted to show you as part of this is the anti-patterns. So we're talking about when things go wrong. So this section here kind of talks about, you know, preventing those things. So, misunderstanding shared responsibility. So this is kind of what I was talking about when understanding who's responsible, both within your organization and also with your partners and with Microsoft as well. So here's a good example. Assume the cloud provider manages updates, and that could be the same for backups, as I mentioned. So just because you're putting things into the cloud, if it's IaaS, if it's a virtual machine, for example, don't assume they're getting backed up, and don't assume that the updates are getting applied. Yeah, that's just the governance one. There's plenty of kind of examples of that, how that works, and there's on the various phases you can see, on the planning phase. For example, you can see anti-patterns of the plan phase strategy. I'm going in reverse, but anyway, strategy. So anti-patterns of the strategy, communications, motivations, as we talked about. So we go from strategy, plan, ready to get the environment ready, adopt to start putting the workloads in, and govern, manage, and secure kind of goes all the way through the framework as well. So this is I just wanted to show you this quick area so you know where to come if you want to look at anti-patterns. I think this is also good for consultants as well. When your customers are saying, "Oh, we want to do it this way," you know, or why isn't it like that? And you can point them to this documentation as well. So, this is kind of how it works, and these are the best practices. So we find that really useful as well because there's a lot of information in here as well. One area I wanted to show you as well, right at the top of the framework. So if you look outside of the phases of the CAF, which are strategy, plan, ready, adopt, govern, and manage, right at the top, you've got the adoption journey. So and here's a really good place to just look at the different types of journeys that you can have. One of the areas in here is if we look at anti-patterns to avoid. So here, right at the top, there's a good breakdown of all the anti-patterns across all the different phases as well. So there's some really good guidance in here. So it's worth checking some of this out as well. We won't go into any detail here, but just to point out that that's there right at the top level. So instead of browsing through there, you can also get them through here as well. So hopefully you found that useful. Drop us a comment or like if you found it useful, and yeah, feel free to follow us. Thanks for watching. We'll probably do some more in the future.